All right, it being 6 p.m, I'll declare open the August meeting of the Shire of Capel. We wish to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Wadandi people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing connection to the land, waters and community. We pay our respects to all members of the Aboriginal communities and their culture, and to elders past and present, their descendants who are with us today, and those who will follow in their footsteps. Record of attendance: we have 7 councillors in attendance tonight, with apologies from Councillor Rosina Mogg. Response to previous public questions taken on notice. They've been provided for in the minutes. So we now move to public question time. I do have some on notice. The first question is from Bob Horsfell.
Good evening. The dust management plan in the Capel Road EIL application does not have sufficient detail about how the dust on the public road will be managed. Can you please explain the dust complaint system that is proposed in the Capel Road application? How will the Shire be informed of any complaints? What involvement will the Shire have in policing the applicant's response to these complaints?
Thank you, Mr. Horsfell, for your questions. In relation to complaints are typically directed through the Infrastructure and Development Directorate for the purpose of updating and monitoring the compliance register. We encourage any concerns regarding non-compliance to be communicated with the Shire for the purposes of upholding any relevant condition applications. And to the other 2 questions, I'll defer to the Chief Executive Officer.
Thank you, Shire President. Thank you, Mr. Horsfell, for your question. In relation to question 1, the Shire's Environment and Health Officers have reviewed the documentation that accompanied the development application and have deemed that the dust management plan to be sufficient for the purposes of complying with the relevant regulations. A proposed condition of approval will be included to ensure that the actions are undertaken in accordance with this plan provided to the Shire. Further, the speed limits have been reduced in an attempt to create a safer road network and to reduce the amount of unsettled dust.
Thank you.
Sorry, and just a response to your last question in terms of policing. The Shire may undertake further investigations on any concerns raised by the community and has the authority to either request the operation cease or to enforce infringements upon the operator in the event of a compliance breach. These are generally decided and dealt with on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Horsfell. The next question is from David Penny. Penny David. Apologies for that.
No, that's right. I get it all the time. Thank you, Councillors, President and CEO. My question is quite a long one, so if everyone's kind of read it, I won't read it through, but my main question was, could Council please confirm that all councillors and decision makers at Council are aware that a previous application was made by the same applicant for the same operation in 2016, and it went to the State Administrative Tribunal, and there were a number of conditions set out which were quite useful that Council imposed upon the applicant, and they would be great if they could be imposed again this time. I don't want to read them all out if everyone's read them already, but I just would like to know whether each of these conditions are going to be imposed on the applicant this time.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. David. We'll make sure that a copy of your question is circulated to the entire Council, and it will be included in the minutes of this meeting as you submitted it as well. Regarding covering each condition individually, we'll rather explain the overall process, which should hopefully address your query. Extractive industries licences and any associated conditions reflect the specifics of the operation at the time, including the variety of conditions such as location, ground conditions, soil types, proximity to boundaries and neighbours, etc. The licence conditions applied in the 2016 approval would have been specific to the operations at the time and the location. The current application is 7 years on and will be assessed in the same manner, and any conditions that would be relevant to the current and planned operations would be recommended to apply. Since 2016, the Shire has focused significant effort on the assessment of extractive industry applications with the imposition of more comprehensive and tighter conditions, as well as improved rehabilitation conditions. The Shire's new framework is significantly more comprehensive than what would have been the case in the past. This is highlighted by the recent adoption of the Local Planning Policy 6.2 for extractive industry operations. The Shire has also made significant effort to ensure that any potential road deterioration is understood and factored into conditions that include bonds and fees from operators.
Okay, so are we going to get an answer to each of the previous requirements?
We can take that on notice and try and provide it each individual one, but as I said, that was specific to the application at the time.
Yep.
Going forward, it would be captured under our newer and more updated planning policy.
Yeah, okay, so my questions mainly revolve around the condition of Brookdale Road. So a lot of the application focuses on the site. So my questions were very specific about Brookdale Road, which is materially the same as what it was 7 years ago, other than there's been a bit of crest improvement and widening on 3 of the bends.
Sure.
So it's still a gravel road. It's been resheeted at one end, and the eastern end hasn't been resheeted at all. Western end hasn't been resheeted at all. So the grader comes, as you know, at great cost to council and cuts the corrugations off in the summertime and fills the potholes in the wintertime. But it's exactly the same road, which should have exactly the same conditions imposed on the applicant as before. So it doesn't really matter if the legislation or whatever your stuff has changed. What I wanted to know is, are these items going to be imposed on the applicant?
That'll be determined as part of the evaluation process. They might not be exactly the same. They could
No.
be different. Yeah. So we'll take that on notice, those specifics, and try and provide a response to it. Understanding the concerns about Brookdale Road, we have changed some of our maintenance practices in that area, and that road is now graded every 8 weeks.
Yeah,
So-
but it still doesn't make up for the fact that there's no gravel on the road to grade.
Yeah.
So you're just turning over dust and rolling, and then the dust just blows away.
And as part of those improved conditions, we do have more mechanisms now to apply bonds and fees for the operators for that road deterioration.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll get a response to this
We'll
in
provide you a
time.
response. Yep.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Kathleen Thompson.
So I'm Kathleen Thompson, Brookdale Road. I'm actually here about Brookdale Road and this new extractive industries licence. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a little history, because I think there's only one councillor here who was here in 2009. So I'm really here to give you a bit of background on what has happened on Brookdale Road with extractive industries licences. 2009 extractive industries licence, Brookdale Road, not recommended by Shire staff unless the applicant upgrade that section of Brookdale Road to a bitumen surface. 2015-16 extractive industries licence, lot 141 Capel Road. Application rejected by council because of the fragile state of Brookdale Road and the impact on residents living close to and using that road. The applicant took the application to SAT, and after SAT mediation, the council approved the extractive industries licence with several conditions that Penny was talking about for the use of Brookdale Road, because the council deemed it too expensive to fight that application at a SAT hearing. It wasn't anything to do with how bad the road was. It was about the cost of lawyers to go to a SAT hearing. So it went back to council, and council basically flipped and said, oh, well, we'll just put some conditions on, so it might be better for the residents, which of course it was. Now, the ratepayers paid for the upgrade of some parts of Brookdale Road. The applicant only paid a small amount, around $8,000. So basically the ratepayers paid for some of Brookdale Road to be upgraded. So the applicant's trucks could actually go on the road. He only had to pay just over $8,000. The applicant actually didn't haul much sand, so we didn't actually have any problems really, except the general fact that Brookdale Road is not a very good road. And we were lucky because there was extensive work done on the eastern end of Brookdale Road. Now, the eastern end is very important to where we're going. The crest was widened so that it wasn't a narrow place for us to pass the trucks, and also the eastern end has had recently extensive resheeting. Now, we're talking about the eastern end, so can you just keep the eastern end in your heads for us? Okay, 2019, Extractive Industries Licence Lot 1, Southwestern Highway. Council rejected this application. One reason was the use of Brookdale, Fowler, Kilpatrick roads as the haulage route. This is 2019. This is Extractive Industries Licence Lot 1, Southwestern Highway. They wanted to use Brookdale, Fowler and Kilpatrick as the haulage route, and one of the reasons Council rejected that application was because the roads were too fragile, too narrow, and basically had no gravel on them. SAT also rejected that application, and that was a SAT hearing for the same reasons. One of them being Brookdale, Fowler, Kilpatrick were not suitable for haulage trucks. Now, if you have any questions, please stop me. Okay.
So, thank you, Ms Thomas. I'll need to ask you to come to your question.
Yep, I'm getting
please.
there. You need to be patient. I have one more bit and then I have
I've allowed
the
you 3
questions.
minutes.
All right,
I need
so
you to get to
we're
your question, Ms Thompson.
we're looking at 2023 Ken Bell Road proposal, same proponent, same site. He doesn't want to use the eastern end of Brookdale anymore, the end that has had all the work done on it. He wants to use the western end, which has virtually no gravel on it, and he wants to go down Fowler, which is very skinny, has water over it in winter, and is of concern for us as the road users. My questions, and thank you for your patience, my questions. Historically, the Council has rejected Extractive Industries licence applications applying to use the fragile road systems of Brookdale, Fowler and Kilpatrick roads in the North Boyanup area as haulage routes. However, if this current application to relicense Lot 141 Kenbell Road were to be successful, who will pay for the reconstruction of the roads, which will surely deteriorate with the addition of heavy haulage trucks? An estimated up to possibly 6,000 truck movements, haulage truck movements, workers' vehicles, maintenance trucks, fuel trucks and possibly water trucks. So we're not talking about just 6,000 haulage trucks, we're talking about a whole operation down the end of Brookdale Road. So that's my question. Who will pay for the reconstruction of the road?
Sure. Thank you, Ms Thompson, for your question. Since the introduction of Local Planning Policy 6.2, the Shire has reconsidered the approach to such situations and believe it has the necessary processes in place now to internally enforce road condition monitoring. As part of the approach of road condition monitoring, the Shire has reviewed how it can better resource such checks, and as such, generally have included a condition for road deterioration co-contribution to be provided by the applicant, or alternatively seek to impose a condition that requires the applicant to upkeep the road network to the satisfaction of the Shire of Capel.
Okay, so just recently in the Skippings Road application, there was actually no detail about that except that the Shire staff were happy for the applicant to look after the road. There was, and that's a big open-ended question. What do you have to do? Take them to court to get money to pay for the road reconstruction or whatever? I'm not sure. In Jalora as well, with the upgrade of the extractive industries licence there. One road in particular, and the May Shire Council, I was here and there was someone complaining that the Shire had put in that extractive industries licence no money to come in to help that road be maintained. So I want the Shire to understand that ratepayers can't be the ones who pick up the bill all the time for other people to make money.
And the Shire has noticed that in part of this new policy we have in place. In past, there has been pretty loose conditions even regarding truck movements. The Shire has certainly improved its conditions process in reviewing applications around those sorts of things. So there were some extractive industries which had quite a high number of truck movements per day, simply because conditions weren't properly considered at the time.
Okay, so I'm relieved to hear that the Shire are looking. And my next question, the 10-year capital works program does not include funds to upgrade any of the roads that I've been talking about tonight. Presuming the Shire will take care not to burden the ratepayer with the cost of extra maintenance, gravel resheeting and road reconstruction that will be required, how will the Shire calculate the amount of funding required from the applicant? When would the applicant have to pay that money? And will these conditions be clearly stated prior to the application coming to council? Because I would like to know what exactly, and I think an applicant would also want to know exactly what he is going to be held responsible and accountable for.
Sure. The Shire uses strategies such as site weighbridges to gather data on the tonnage and number of vehicle movements to inform the potential impact on access roads and how much the operator should contribute in maintaining the road network and local road capacity. As mentioned in the previous answer, the Shire may also require the operator to maintain the road network to our satisfaction as an alternative approach. In terms of road deterioration funding, the multiplying cost is set by the state government, and we work it out based on the information that I just mentioned then. The Shire has recently in the past written to the state requesting an increase in that road deterioration multiplier, given that it hasn't increased for some time.
So just going on from where I've been before in this kind of, well, it was in 2016, we asked for an independent audit of the state of Brookdale Road prior to the trucks going on the road, so that it can be actually measured, the truck movements could be measured. Now that was rejected. So as far as I understand, no one has ever been out on Brookdale Road and worked out exactly what condition it's in. I mean, I can go through a number of things that have happened to me on that road, and I probably know the road better than any of you because I've been there for 35 years, to the point where we can be driving our cars along the road and the car actually falls into a sand hole. I was riding my horse along the road one day. The horse actually fell through the road into a sand hole. So there's never been a base on that road. It's just sand. It was when I went to live there, it was basically a sand track with a bit of gravel sprinkled on it, and it seems to be that sometimes a bit more gravel's put on it, so it's never actually been formed as a proper road. So I guess I'm standing here saying to you councillors, I think it would be a travesty of justice to allow haulage trucks on the road. I think it also would be...
Sure, thank you, Ms Thompson. It is public question time. I think you've asked your questions.
Excellent.
But I understand what you're saying. We can have a look into when that road was last assessed, because we do have regular traffic counting along our road, so we can have a look into when that road was last counted.
It's had traffic counters on it, but I don't think that's the point, Mr President. The point is, will that road ever be properly assessed as to how suitable it is, particularly for haulage trucks? And thank you very much for your
Sure.
time, everyone. I think I've made my point very clear.
Sure. Thank you, Ms Thompson. I might just add, though, we are reviewing our asset maintenance strategy, with this year focusing on roads and our public open spaces. When that strategy comes out for comment, I encourage you and others to provide some feedback on that. All right, there's no other questions on notice. Is there any questions from the floor? No? All right, we'll move on to applications of leave of absence. Is there any applications? No? Declarations of interest. Just got the one from myself on item 11.1, notice of motion, an indirect financial interest in that matter. Notice of items to be discussed behind closed doors. There was an item, but it has since been withdrawn. Now move to confirmation of the minutes. 8.1, the ordinary meeting of the council, 2nd of August, rescheduled from the 26th of July. Can I have a move that those minutes be accepted? Councillor McCleary, as a seconder. Councillor Tarantroy. Nothing from the mover or seconder. Is there any discussion on those minutes? Anything further from the mover? I'll put those minutes to the vote. Those in favour? And those are carried unanimously. Announcements by the presiding member of that discussion. Just a couple from me. My President's activity report is unfortunately missing from this agenda due to a technical issue. It will be included in the minutes. And just a bit of news I'd like to share. On the 9th of August, the Shire hosted 13 delegates from Malaysia on behalf of the Shire State Government. Arranged by the Future Food Network, the delegation had a taste of the fine produce we have here in the district. Following a presentation from the Shire of Capel, the delegates were treated to a tour of the facilities at the Capel Marron Farm, where they saw the future of the site and also sampled some of the future menu. Following a tour at the Marron Farm, the tour then moved to a local dairy farm hosted by local Darren Merritt of Elgin Dairies. Insight was given into the high standards of animal welfare, breeding and production we have in our local farmers. It was a privilege to welcome these delegates to the Shire of Capel and showcase a small slice of the fantastic offering we have here. Deputations, presentations and petitions. There was a request for a presentation, but it has since been withdrawn. So we now move to item 11.
Thank you, everyone. The Shire President has left the room given that he has declared a indirect financial interest in item 11.1, notice of motion. There is a notice of motion from Councillor Andrew noting that item point C has different voting requirements because it is a revoking or changing of a decision under the Act 5.21 subclause 1E regulations of 1996. Can I get a mover? Can I get the mover for part A and B? Councillor Andrew. Do I have a seconder? This is for part A and B. Councillor Noonan. Mover wish to speak. The microphone, please. It's not turned on.
Oh, sorry. So this came to a head for me because it has felt like a very long time since we signed the lease, which included the capital upgrade plan attached as an annexure, and we haven't had much movement. So that is what has prompted these. Upon further questioning, to the CEO, it's my interpretation of Section 12 of the lease that the capital upgrade plan was to have two parts. One was a work schedule, and the second part was a planned timings for those work schedules, for that work schedule. Those timings have never been provided to us from WELSA, which means, so connected to that, despite the fact that that capital upgrade plan has been accepted and has been to the satisfaction of Shire officers as per Council's decision, WELSA has never been provided with the approval notice, which actually then makes them give action to the items stipulated in the capital upgrade works schedule. So that is why we're here tonight, and that is why I've submitted these two motions. So it's my interpretation of the lease that upon that capital upgrade plan being to the satisfaction of Shire staff and its inclusion into the lease, WELSA should have been issued with an approval notice, which then gave them 6 months to perform all the works that did not require an approval from an authority. It also would have given us a baseline of when all the other works that did require an authority to have actually been completed. We found out this afternoon that the main two works, which are still outstanding, the roofing and the effluent issues, are unbudgeted, haven't gone to tender yet, and there's not actually even any confirmed plans. So those, particularly the roof and the effluent plan, won't be in place by this summer. I think we need some serious action by WELSA, and I think that we need to show more leadership on this issue, because that's what the community wanted from us. That's why we undertook to get the capital upgrade plan, and to this point it has far from delivered, I think, what the expectations of this council were at the time. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Newland, would you like to speak as a seconder?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy President. Yes, the Boyne-up sale yards are obviously a very, very important facility and industry for the Shire, and everybody on the council wants that industry to prosper and to do well. It's an integral part of the Shire. However, it's frustrating, not just for the councillors, but for many people who use the sale yards as buyers and as sellers, who've been saying for decades now that and in fact even the operators who just this afternoon spoke to us, that the facilities are antiquated, they don't meet current animal welfare regulations, or haven't done. They're not in an ideal location, being in the middle of a town site, which is in fact hindering that town site from growing. The long-term future of the sale yards is to be moved to a location near Boyne-up, but not within the town site itself. So I appreciate the briefing that we had this afternoon by Mr. Dean Hubbard from Elders. That was good to have that briefing. We were given an assurance that, well, I won't call it an assurance. I hope that we would be given a something of a schedule or a timeline within the next couple of days. But there wasn't a hard or firm assurance, and there wasn't any promise of a schedule with defined timelines. It was all still very, you know, as and when it will happen. And I appreciate that Walser is frustrated that they have been held up at various different points with, with getting Shire approvals, with getting approvals from various different government departments, DEWA and so on. They've had difficulties with weather events. So in winter, the site is very problematic with the runoff. That's affected the planning for the shade, the initial planning for shade sails and now a hard roof. In summer, obviously without shade and if penning stock levels are not suitable or are not adequate for animal welfare, that's when problems occur. Now we appreciate that they have made some adjustments in terms of timing of sales and those sorts of things. However, this will be the third summer that we've had this problem or this issue where we've made it pretty clear, I think, to Walser that we really need to see some capital upgrade action, and yet we're still seeing, and we appreciate they've apparently made plans and they've been talking to people, talking to our people, all of that sort of stuff, but the council, we haven't seen this is the plan and this is the timeline, and I think that's what we're sort of getting fairly anxious to see, and I think it's important that we express that and make that fairly well apparent, not just to Walser but to the community who is expecting us to do exactly that. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there any speakers against the motion? Is there anyone at all who wishes to speak on the motion? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Deputy President. This probably starting off with a few questions. There's been some work done on site and that didn't require development applications. So it's a list of things that I believe the CEO was provided with.
Yep.
We can recite those.
Yeah, I'll direct your question as to what those things are through to the CEO.
Through you, Deputy Shire President, the information, so significant range of works not needing development approval has progressed and been implemented on site in accordance with that clause in the lease. Some of these may have only required a building permit, which have been issued under delegated authority and implemented. These items have included abolition block upgrades for staff and customer, car parking upgrades, additional water drinking points in holding pens. Non-slip matting has been purchased and will be installed to ramps as soon as possible. Data and weather loggers in pens to monitor heat. Entrance brick wall newly erected, refenced around the site and upgraded security fencing to the entire boundary. Refenced holding paddocks, speed bumps installed to improve safety. Walkways marked and guard rails installed. Zebra crossings marked and placed between canteen and offices. Ablution ramps and raised flooring installed. Old ablution blocks demolished and removed. New patio and area, barbecue area currently under construction. New concrete flooring to weighbridge, office and internal yard safety latches and upgraded and installed. Load ramp repairs and improvements. Effluent baffles in the waste treatment system renewed and installed. Weather station installed. Groundwater monitoring installed. New weighbridge installed. New draft facilities installed. Total yard signage refitted. All asbestos contamination identified, isolated and or removed from site.
Thank you, CEO. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you
like
for
to
that.
continue?
So as we can see, a whole lot of work's been done where they can proceed without some of the approvals that Shire need to give in a development application process. The hard part is they've started up with a concept plan and it's had to change because of external influences, such as ability to put footings in PTA land. So those sorts of things still need to be addressed, and then there's the effluent disposal and the cost of doing that, and they're working through the mechanisms of that. We did get a verbal undertaking from today's discussions earlier that they would supply us with a schedule which would involve a critical path which would identify some of those things that are holding them up, which is like the external approvals. I'm okay with sending correspondence to them saying, look, we seriously want to see some improvements on your planning and a timeline that we can talk to and have a baseline to work with. These things will change in the life of a project, but at least if we get some regular updates based on a schedule that's submitted, that will be fine. I think the motion as it reads at the moment, I'm not happy with. I'd probably foreshadow a change or amendment to that motion. But I think I'd hate to go back to square one and finish up with a new lease. We've got a lease at the moment that we can work with to get the outcome. If we go through a new lease, we might see a different outcome that we don't totally accept. And we can work with this. And I believe that even without this motion, we'll have actions that will come back to us. And probably in summing up, the 6-month period comes up in September, I'm aware, from the signing of the lease, which was the obligations under the lease. So we still haven't reached that timeline. It's just that we need to show some urgency from them that they'll provide some of those addendums that are required under the lease.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the item? Councillor Terran-Troy.
There's been a lot of delays with this whole process. However, the meeting today gave us assurance that they are going to come back to us with a draft schedule. And as Peter McCleary said, Councillor McCleary said, we've still got the September deadline to the 6 months. I don't like the wording of the motion because it's adversarial, and I really don't want to put at risk something that our farmers and local farmers need with the sale yards. The change from the soft roof to a hard roof, which is a sawtooth hard roof, needs more design and more time to do that. And so they're getting to the point where they can put that into a draft schedule now. They've changed the reasons they've done it is because of the effluent issues and the rain. And the rainwater are flooding the tanks, the effluent tanks. So like only a couple of weeks ago we had 90 mils of rain. So that's a lot of rain. And they had to get 3 trucks in to empty it. So yes, I want to give WALSA the opportunity to get to the 6-month deadline. There's been a lot of things beyond their control that have happened, and a lot of things beyond the Shire's control, and I think going hard yards right now at a crucial time, I just would hate to see the negotiations stop altogether. That would be terrible for this district, this farming district. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the item? Councillor Dillon.
Might as well put in my 20 cents worth. Thank you, Mr Deputy President. Look, I understand the intent of this motion, but I, probably similarly to Councillor Terran-Troy, am probably just a bit cautious. Look, you can sense the frustration from Mr Hubbard this afternoon on the team's briefing that the council got. You could tell that, you know, WALSA, Nutrient, Elders, they're all frustrated with the pace of these capital works, coming to fruition. I believe we'll get there. I think the executive staff are keeping adequate pressure on Walser. I think we need to weigh up risks in this particular sphere, because it's a very, very important piece of infrastructure, albeit, like Councillor Noonan said, an antiquated one, and there's a significant amount of money going to be spent on it eventually. I'd just really, as much as we all, and I think we all are in agreement, we're all about animal welfare, we just need to be a little bit careful. We need to keep pressure on Walser just to keep the wheels turning. We've got this structure plan coming to us hopefully pretty soon, and I'll back the executive staff in to keep the pressure on Walser, and I think we'll get the right outcome. I don't know that this motion is going to do anything other than poke the bear.
Thank you, Councillor. Given that all councillors except for myself have had the opportunity to speak, I may just speak myself. I share the same frustration and view that I wish that a lot of these projects were well underway. Well, not a lot, these major projects, and we're usually referring to the roofing, was underway. But I do understand the circumstances in which we're in this situation. In regards to the actual motion itself, it makes quite a number of references to the ordinary council decision of the 19th of January 2022. And I take council back to that decision because there was actually quite a number of amendments, and the primary amendment was actually to remove a timeline from that item. So the motion that was actually moved by Councillor Noonan saw the need for some sort of shade to be installed by the end of 2022. Council actually decided to remove that from the motion, and the substantive motion was approved. The capital upgrade plan condition remained, as that was obviously a primary goal or a primary vision of this council to ensure that that was part of the lease. But that was to the satisfaction of Shire officers. So Shire of officers have obviously the lease was signed earlier this year, just under 6 months ago. The argument around the 6-month period is as clear as mud as well, because if we argue that it's 6 months from the lease, well then we're actually not really able to pursue this until next month. But the way the lease actually reads is it refers to 6 months from the approval notice, and the approval notice, as Councillor Andrew outlined in her first contribution, has actually itself not been provided. So the 6-month period has not necessarily begun. That clock hasn't started ticking down, but it also only refers to items which don't require a development approval. So structures like the roof, which require a development approval, while will have to come back to council, and those items aren't bound by that 6-month period, as I understand it in the lease. To that as well, I think Councillor McCleary's outlined quite a number of challenges that Walser have had with delivering that, and I think the outcome of a solid roof is a far better outcome than the shade sails that we were originally talking about. So I am glad that is on the cards. The challenges around that site, in the fact that we only hold the MOU or the property or the understanding of the property on 2 of the 4 sites that the sale yards is on, the other 2 being PTA. And I think we all know how notoriously difficult the PTA is in dealing with when you're trying to manage or do anything on their land. But then continuing on to the, I guess, how we deal with this challenge going forward, I, as again, 100% agree that I would have liked to have seen this done before summer. That is exactly how I feel. But there has been challenges. The Shire staff have been bestowed upon them the power from council to sign that lease when they felt that was at the satisfaction of Shire officers, and that has been done. But the lease also outlines as well, in that same section, section 12, around how we can negotiate that or deal with disputes through that method. And that actually immediately refers back to Annexure 5, which is an expert determination process. The expert determination process, I think, outlines pretty well how council is meant to manage if council does feel that it needs to pursue this further, which again, as I said, that 6-month period actually hasn't come about yet. The process is in the lease. The process in the lease is not in parallel to the process that has been proposed in this motion. The process in the lease talks about writing to them a 10 business day in good faith to explore a resolution and giving them an opportunity to respond within 10 days. I think what motion A, having to write to them to say that they do not comply and giving them a 14-day period, is perhaps not in good faith of the expert determination process, and also is not in compliance with the periods that are outlined in that process. This process also allows us to identify a joint expert to deal with the dispute if we get to that case. So given that we, I think, have had a productive conversation with Walser, and Walser are well aware that council are unhappy through an informal means that these processes or these things have not taken place, I don't necessarily feel that the motion as it stands, A and B, are really the right way to go about dealing with this, and happy to have conversations with council about how we do that, but we do also need to let things play out as they are as well. Another really important thing to mention is that while there is mention of a schedule within the lease, the actual item that came before council made no reference to timelines or schedules. It only made reference to the capital upgrade plan, and to which it was of the satisfaction of Shire officers. So I can only assume, and I am confident in this as well, that at the time when the capital upgrade plan was presented to Shire officers, that it was to their satisfaction to sign the lease. In conclusion, I feel the frustration, I share the frustration around the timeline, but unfortunately I don't think we are able to action and follow a procedure that's been outlined in A and B tonight. Given that I was the last person to speak, I will give it to Councillor Andrew as the mover.
Thank you. The only thing that I would say is that the reason that we removed the time requirements back in 2022 was that it was inactionable because the lease wasn't even signed yet. So that time stipulation had to be removed. It was obviously our major error that we didn't then put it back in. I don't necessarily have the same high regard for Mr. Hubbard as some of my colleagues. I don't think he was frustrated at the process. I think he was frustrated. His mood changed quite obviously once I asked him some questions. So I don't think he was frustrated at the process. I think he's more frustrated with me, and that is absolutely fine. And one of the main reasons I don't hold a lot of stock into what Mr. Hubbard said, or in the timings that are meant to be coming in due course, is because, to quote his own words, Elders is running on their own time frame. And with that, I think I'll leave the debate there.
So I'll put the motion to the vote, remembering that we're only dealing with items A and B at the moment. All those in favour? That's 2. All those against? That's 4 against, 2, 4. So the motion is lost. Councillor Andrew, do you wish to move your point C? Yep, and I'll just confirm that Given that point C is to revoke or change a decision under the Act 5.251E and the Local Government Regulations 1996, it will need to be supported by at least 1/3 of the number of councillors, which will mean that it needs a mover, a seconder and a seconder. So Councillor Andrew has moved that. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Noonan has seconded that. And do I have a second seconder or a thirder? I'll call again. Do I have a second seconder? The item has failed for want of a second seconder. And I'll just round back. Councillor McCleary, you did make comment about potentially foreshadowing. Is there no? There is no motion foreshadowed. And that is the case. Item 11.1 has been dealt with, and we will allow the Shire President to re-enter the room. All right. Questions of which previous notice has been given. There are none, so we now move on to Chief Executive Officer reports. 13.1, Committees of Council minutes. Is there a mover for those minutes? Councillor Terrantroy. Is there a seconder? Councillor Dillon. Councillor Terrantroy.
Moved as read.
Councillor Dillon. Is there any speakers for or against those minutes? Councillor Andrew.
Thank you. I see that one of the attachments is now marked amended. Is that the September minutes that you were missing from, Mr. President? Is that what the amendment is?
I'll have to get that clarified because it was. I'll just double check myself. No, it still hasn't got my name on those September BFAC minutes. Sorry, just clarifying, Councillor. Sorry, the Director of Infrastructure and Development?
The minutes were amended to include changes to the map that was attached to those minutes at the request of the meeting. Sure. That was why it's recorded as amended.
Okay. That's all right. Yeah, so those minutes still don't reflect my presence at the September BFAC meeting.
No.
Finished, Councillor?
Oh, I have a second question,
Yep,
but I thought that we still had to deal with that because we can't approve minutes that are wrong.
Oh, it'll need to be moved as an amendment. But I'll take your questions first.
And there doesn't appear to have been any impartiality interests declared when voting on the honorariums to the Chief and Deputy Chief.
Sure. Interest declarations.
Wouldn't they have been required to as committee members?
As was discussed as we reviewed those committee structures, they're not committee members, so they're not captured by that regulation, which we understand the frustration in that. As we've confirmed, we will resolve that once the committee is reformed after the election, so that all committee members are captured by interest declarations. Are there any other speakers on those minutes? Councillor Noonan?
Just a question, if I may. If you could just clarify as much as anything for the people who may be in the audience or the public gallery or watching online, that the point that Councillor Andrew raised with the honorariums, and I'll make the point, I've got no problem with honorariums being paid for people who volunteer and do important work within the Shire. However, there were it's not a good look the way the procedure unfolded at those meetings. Will that be? Can you just outline the email that you and the information that you presented to us as councillors, and also whether or not this will become part of the audit committee for the next audit?
So as part of the Local Government Act, members of committees and councillors have an obligation to disclose financial interests, indirect financial interest, proximity, and impartiality where it exists. Due to a error in the adoption of the Bushfire Advisory Committee back in October 2021, the non-council members were appointed, well, they weren't appointed to the committee. As such, they were placed there as advisors. Because of that, they're not captured by the requirements of interest disclosures under the Regulations and Act. That obviously doesn't fit with the objective of accountability in the Shire's core values. So as part of that, the council commits, I can't commit council to that. The administration has committed to presenting the future council after the October elections a new set of standards that would ensure that all committee members are captured by those declaration requirements. And going forward, we'll also set up new training requirements that any elected member or committee member receives sufficient training to ensure they understand the requirements to undertake interest declarations and how to fill those out. In addition to that, these matters of oversight in this formation of these committees will be presented to the next Audit and Risk Committee for review. All right. I'd just like to move one amendment to note my presence at the 21 September 2022, geez, it was a year ago, Bushfire Advisory Committee meeting. Is there a seconder to that change? Councillor Terran-Troy. September 2022. As the mover, I've got nothing further to say that. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Seconder. Oh, sorry. That's nothing to say, Councillor? No. Is there any discussion on that amendment? No. I've got nothing further. I'll put that amendment to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried unanimous. That becomes part of the substantive motion. Is there anything further on that item? No. Councillor Terran-Troy, do you wish to close?
Just to say that that was, thank you for the amendment, we're just confirming that these minutes, and we're noting them, so thank you very much.
I'll put those minutes to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 13.2, the adoption of the Shire of Capel Corporate Business Plan 2023 to 2027. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor McCleary. Is there a seconder? Councillor Dillon. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll just move the motion as read. It's a long process doing these business plans and updating on a regular basis. There's some good outcomes in there. They'll get continually reviewed as we go forward, but it gives us a bit of direction over the next 5 years.
Councillor Dillon. Are there any speakers against the recommendation? Speakers for? No, I'll just say a few words myself. Yeah, it's just good to see this updated plan come to council again, the next stage of works. Again, it's quite ambitious, but through conversations and workshops, we've had assurances from the administration that it's deliverable and builds on from the corporate business plan last year, which was largely about developing strategies and building towards a organisation that can deliver. And this is the start of that transition into delivering on those strategies and putting things in place. So it'd be good to actually see some of that work come to fruition and what it looks like on the ground. So I commend the recommendation. Are there any other speakers on that item? Councillor McCleary, any further? No. I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Infrastructure and development reports. Item 14.1, project variation Capel offset planning project site 2. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Andrew. Is there a seconder? The Councillor Sciano. Councillor Andrew.
Thank you. It's good to see some offset planting in our own shire. Makes a nice change. I think that's all I've got to say.
The Deputy President.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is the continuation of the Kemerton tender, which we awarded a little while ago. And I mean, the variation itself is not that large, but I think the reasoning behind it for the weed control events and also learning from the site beforehand, which I think is interesting that this council decided to go with a different tenderer than what was recommended. And in fact, it's interesting that, and you'll see in the report that the site, neighbouring site or the other site that we've had with the original preferred candidate has had some tree growth or vegetation growth failures. But I think we are learning from that and from that site with this different organisation or Trannon that we had engaged to do this project, and they've come back and taken some learnings from that site, and hopefully this will be more successful. And of course, I mean, the weed control, it's interesting that you know, we've got a state government agency now looking over our offset projects, which this council's had quite an in-depth conversation about the outrageous costs of managing offsets and how it will blow out local government projects across the board. And now we've got a state government agency in DBCA rocking up and telling us that they want us to do things differently, which are just blowing out our costs or making suggestions. But I mean, unfortunately, we don't control the soil that much, and if we need additional weed control and we need to learn from the first site, then I think the justification is there for why we do need to have a variation to that contract, and hopefully it will result in a more successful planting.
Are there any speakers for or against this item? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. I actually have a question which is directed to the Executive Office of Finance. I'm just wondering whether the initial planting, whether that's a capitalised item or an operational item.
The Director of Community and Corporate.
Thank you. Through the Chair, that's an operational item.
Anything further,
Thank you.
Councillor?
Yeah, but now I'll go. Look, offset planning is an interesting thing. We're probably going to get landed with sites that aren't that great at vegetation, hence they need planting. There's a lot of work in those, and obviously we've had some learnings from this process. I think the outcome of this motion is reasonable, and I'm for the motion.
Are there any other speakers to this item? No, Councillor Andrew?
Don't I look silly? I didn't read one of the sentences in here properly. This planting, offset planting, isn't in our shire, it's up at Kemerton. So I just wanted to make that correction.
All right, with that, I'll put it to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Item 14.2, single dwelling and building envelope nomination, lot 4002, number 5, Cruise Lane, Capel. There was one objection that was received to this proposal, however, it has since been withdrawn. Under the planning guidelines, if there is an objection received, it needs to be presented to council. Although the objection was withdrawn and it could have been dealt with by Shire officers under delegated authority, council said it appropriate that they still consider the item, given that it was put on the public agenda. With that, is there a mover for that item? Councillor Sciano, seconded. Councillor Dillon. The Deputy President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I mean, I think the important part here is that obviously this had come to council, given that there was at the time an objection, and that objection has been withdrawn. There is some discussion around boundary setbacks in here, and ultimately the setback between the two properties or the two dwellings comes to almost 10 metres. The staff have recommended to support the application, and that's what I intend to do.
Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, it's good to see above everything, I think it was due to the diligence of our staff that the complainant or the objector to this particular dwelling has withdrawn their complaints, because I think, cooler heads have prevailed, and they're happy with the outcome. So that's the main thing. But I agree with Councillor Sciano. It doesn't hurt that it's been presented to us tonight.
Are there any speakers for or against this item? Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. I can concur with the mover and the seconder on this one. One of the good things about this is, as it coming to council, it shows the due diligence that goes into looking at these not to standard requests of planning, and I think it's good that the public are able to see some of the background to the decision making, even if now it's a council decision, and it would have been the same with the officers' delegation.
Are there any other speakers to this item? Councillor Tarantroy.
Just quickly, I just wanted to reiterate that it's down to the staff explaining the works and showing the complainant the plans and getting them to understand the whole picture. And I think that's a really wonderful thing, because it shows that we've got a system that works. Someone can disagree, then they can withdraw as well if they decide that they understand now. So I think that's really good that we've got that in place. Thank you. Oh, and thank you staff for working so well with the resident.
Are there any other speakers to that item? Councillor Andrew.
Thank you. I'll chuck my 2 cents worth in. I will vote in favour of this now that the next door neighbour has withdrawn his or her objection. I probably sometimes look at things a bit too black and white, but I would have voted against the officer's recommendation, because I feel like if the person that bought this block didn't like the building envelope, then rather than try to reduce the setback and that is in place. Perhaps they should have bought a block where they did like the building envelope. So I would have happily have voted in support of the objecting neighbour, but they have withdrawn their objection, so I'll vote in favour.
All right, any other speakers to that item? Does the mover wish to close? I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. Item 14.3, Local Planning Policy 6.13, Tiny Houses, Consideration of Submissions and Final Adoption. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Terrantroy. Is there a seconder? Councillor Sciano. Councillor Terrantroy.
I think this is a wonderful proposal because it's going to help with tiny houses, and it's a great way for the community development going. More tiny houses, single lots, and the use of the tiny houses for short-term tourism accommodation and for residential accommodation. Thank you.
The Deputy President. Are there any speakers against this policy? Speakers for? No. Does the mover wish to close? I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried unanimous. Item 14.4, the appointment of Deputy Chief Bushfire Control Officers. Is there a mover for that item? Councillor McCleary. Is there a seconder? Councillor Noonan. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. One of the key things is the change for the deputy bushfire control officers. Now there's 4. That gives a bit of redundancy in the process. There is an increase in honorariums that I believe will come through to council. Yeah, look, the recommendation highlights the key points in this and the benefits to the Shire, and it helps with the workload of the volunteers that we have going out there and putting themselves on the line to defend some bushfires.
Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, just to follow on from the points made by Councillor McCleary, having more people with the experience that at the deputy level gives more people a better understanding of the workload and the requirements and the responsibilities that the role of the chief has, and it provides an avenue for promotion, if you like, an incentive for more volunteers to put their hands up for these very, very important positions, and that provides us not just redundancy but a path for promoting people with a good background and experience when inevitably people do retire from various different positions. So I think it's a good idea to have the 4, and certainly we'll be voting for the motion.
Are there any speakers against the motion? Councillor Andrew.
I have a question.
Yep.
In previous years, have we appointed the Deputy Chief Bushfire Control Officers for a period of 4 years?
Oh, you've tested my knowledge there. I think it's usually a 4-year term. Let's see if that's... I don't remember it being referred to in the agenda. No, there's nothing in the background. We'll have to probably take that one on notice, or the Director of Infrastructure and Development.
Thanks, Mr. President. I don't believe that this item has been considered for the past 20 years because there's never been a deputy that's come forward for re-election. So it is not something that has been addressed over that time at all.
Oh, okay. It appears that there was no time period put on the previous appointments or appointment, but we'll have to get that. We'll get that clarified, Councillor. Anything further, Councillor Andrew?
Was there a reason why the BFAC wanted these terms to be 4 years?
Based on the agenda and the advice that was at the BFAC meeting, it was 4 years was within a sort of transition period that has been discussed, given the removal of the Deputy Chief Bushfire Control Officer who's decided to step down, and the Chief Bushfire Control Officer has indicated that he might look to step down in the future. So I suppose 4 years was just a recommendation, just to sort of align slightly ahead of election cycles. If there's more to that, the Director of Infrastructure and Development.
Another reason, Mr. President, was because it, in the past, had been almost like a sign up for life until you're ready to retire from the role. So this has given the opportunity for people to come in for a known short term. If they wish at that point, then they can put themselves forward for further nomination, or it gives people the opportunity to step down and others to take their place. So it was considered a period of time that would be most appropriate for the training of those people, and also give that flexibility that it wasn't assigned forever. It was just a 4-year term that they could then decide at that point whether to go ahead or not.
Okay. Apologies for that. Right, sorry. So was there anything further, Councillor Andrew, sorry?
Oh, what happens if one of the Deputy Chief Bushfire Control Officers vacates within that 4-year period?
Well, the deputy for that zone, or in agreement with the other deputies, would take over deputyship of that zone until either it was appointed or decided that there's no need to fill that vacant position.
So is there a policy that oversees how these Deputy Chief Bushfire Control Officers are nominated, appointed, voted into the role? What happens if they step down? Is there an overarching policy that actually controls this?
There's no overarching policy specific to the Deputy Chief Bushfire Control Officer. There's various guidelines and regulation through various acts and regulation, obviously. This appointment's based on the recommendation from the BFAC, on their advice, as per allocating the deputy to the zones as per the map. The conversation was just having, though, is that map actually doesn't specify which deputy is in each area, so we're just getting that changed to be in line with what the BFAC recommendation was. And then essentially, so yeah, the understanding is the deputy has control of a specific area on the map. If they go away, then they negotiate with a nearby deputy to cover their area, but ultimately control continues and always will rest with the Chief Bushfire Control Officer unless they delegate that responsibility.
But there's no overarching policy, either at the BFAC or at Council, that actually controls this process?
There's no overarching policy specific to it, no. But there's various other guidelines and documentation, and the Shire went out through an expressions of interest in filling these positions.
Sorry, who did?
The Shire went out for expressions of interests from individuals who are interested in putting their hand up for this position.
Okay, and then what happened?
Then those individuals were presented as recommendations to the BFAC based on their experience and where they were located. The BFAC then considered that recommendation, which was to allocate the 4 individuals who had nominated to what happened to be the zones which largely covered the brigade areas that they were part of, with the exemption of Mark Roberts, who would be covering the Stirling and Capel areas. And then that recommendation is what has been provided to Council this evening.
So considering we've also discovered tonight that all the members except for yourself and Councillor Dillon are advisors rather than committee members, does the BFAC, as it's currently constituted, actually have the authority to have even voted and have made these appointments?
Yeah, so they still work as a committee or a working group and can make recommendations, and that's all they have done. They don't have any legal authority, regardless of even if they were a formally appointed committee of council. They don't have any authority to make that decision. It would have had to come to council anyway.
Okay.
So it's just, this is their advice and recommendation. Yep. All right, just in light of that area, that the zone map doesn't actually show the areas. We just have a amendment which I'm happy to move with the following words the Chief Executive Officer has written down. Do you want me to?
Do you want me to read it out?
Oh, I can read it. What is it? Sorry. The Chief Executive Officer will just read out that change to recommendation 2.
Can you copy 2? Through you, Shire President, so we might suggest that the wording of part recommendation 2 be amended to read: divides the district into 4 zones as per attachment 14.4.2 on the basis of the existing brigade areas and allocates the following areas to the individual Deputy Chief Bushfire Control Officers, comma, as an area of primary responsibility, and then underneath parts A, B, C and D. As an area of...
So you need to just delete,
primary responsibility, colon.
Yeah.
We'll just reread it. Take out as an area to an officer. As an area of primary responsibility, Jalura Jeff McDougall. Elgin Barry Bell. Stirling and Capel. Mark Roberts. And Boyner Daniel Tate.
Yes, that's my amendment there. I also just have an additional amendment to point 4 to change the period from 4 years to 2 years. All right. Is there a seconder to that amendment? Councillor Dillon. Look, I think the changes to point 2 are pretty self-explanatory, but the change to point 4, look, I've had a few discussions with some of the BFAC members and since this decision, but also I just sort of think of it is a major change in the structure of our deputy chief structure. So I think 2 years is a better term than 4. It allows us 2 seasons to review the matter and determine whether it's the appropriate structure going forward. It means we'd still have, for sure, the same the same chief bushfire control officer within that period, who can then see if it will work and make sure we actually are still training these potential future chiefs, which it likely could be. But I think, 2 years just gives us a bit more flexibility in reviewing this new structure, where instead of locking it in for 4 years, I think it just, given it's such a change, we're going from 1 to 4, and this just gives us more of an opportunity to make sure we work out any kinks, if any come up over the 2-year period. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, I concur. I mean, our volunteer fireys have gone through a mountain of change over the last probably 4 or so years, and what seems to be an even bigger mountain of changes in the last 12, 18 months. Look, I think it's a good change. I think our local fireys would concur with that themselves. It sort of broadens the base of our deputies' experience. We are looking at a big generational change very, very soon within our local brigades, and it wouldn't hurt to have a little bit more broader experience coming through with the deputy role. I agree that probably a 2-year term rather than a 4-year term is beneficial for all parties, and yeah, I agree with your amendment. Thank you.
Are there any speakers for or against the amendment? Councillor Andrew.
I have a question.
Yep.
How come the Chief Bushfire Control Officer isn't included in this recommendation, particularly now if we're reducing it to 2 years rather than 4, because you've indicated that Chris Scott has indicated he will most likely step down in the future, and it's my assumption that you meant within the 4-year period. So now that we've reduced it to 2, is there a reason why perhaps we shouldn't be including the Chief Bushfire Control Officer into this item as well?
We'd have to just get it double checked to ensure it's the absolute valid reason, but I believe it is because the former deputy chief and the chief, as currently is, were both appointed without a time limit to those positions. But we'll make sure we get that clarified. Are there any other speakers to that amendment? As the mover, I've got nothing further to say to it. Is there any... no, that's it. I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? That amendment is carried unanimously. That becomes part of the substantive motion, which we return to. Are there any speakers for or against? Any speakers for or against? Councillor Tarantroy.
Look, I just wanted to say that the work that our volunteer firefighters do for our community are amazing, and I think any opportunity to give a small amount of money to those people, and also to give, I think $4,400 is well spent per year, giving Daniel Tate, Mark Roberts, Jeff McDougall and Barry Bell $1,100 each. So yes, I'm all for this. I think they do wonderful, dangerous work, and they really do save property and save lives. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers to that item? Councillor McCleary, do you wish to close?
I think it's all been said.
I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. Community and Corporate Reports, 15.1, Child Safe Awareness Policy. Thank you. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor McCleary. Is there a seconder? Councillor Sciano. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, look, child safety is paramount. We've seen a lot in media and those items. I think it's a good outcome, helping our communities be more aware. I've sat on seminars when I was with the Surf Lifesaving Club about monitoring all this, and geez, it puts the wind up you of what's out there. I think this is a great motion to move forwards and help our community groups.
The Deputy President. Nothing? Are there any speakers for or against this policy? Councillor Tarantroy.
It's no secret that I'm an educator and I believe in a village approach to raising a child, so I think this is well overdue and I commend this motion. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers to this item? Councillor McCleary, anything further? I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimous. 15.2, New Council Policy, Library Collection Development. That recommendation goes over quite a few pages. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Dillon. Seconder, Councillor Sciano. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Not too much to say on this item, but I am right behind it. I think libraries are a very important part of our community, and this just sort of formalises the approach our library staff and staff will take in terms of the development of our resources within our library systems. I will just point out, and this sort of broke my heart, they're encouraging that we sort of dispense with non-fiction older than 10 years. That would rule out probably 90% of my book collection at home. So I'm not in favour of that part, but broadly, I think it's a fabulous motion, and I encourage my fellow councillors to support it.
The Deputy President.
Thank you, Mr. President. Well, I mean, this has come about with the major changes to regulations, and they're pushed upon us by the state government in relations to interlibrary loans. But I have to admit, in the conversation that I've had with library staff since that has changed, what a productive team. I think they were telling me about book meets and swaps that they have between libraries around the Bunbury Geograph area. I think the manager of library services is however many days a week, or at least one day a week, conducting a shady deal of books from a trunk somewhere in the Bunbury Geograph area. But you know, that's the library team realise they need to do, given the changes in the regulations around, given the changes by the state government into library loans. So I commend them for their initiative, and obviously the policy that we have today is to reflect some of those changes that have been pushed upon us. So I commend the policy to council.
Are there any speakers for or against that item? Councillor Andrew.
Is the non-fiction items published more than 10 years ago, is that a legislative requirement, or is that a condition that we've come up with as a Shire?
The Director of Community and Corporate.
Thank you, through the Chair. Based on conversations and through the development of this policy, it's probably based on analysis, just in terms of how the trends have sort of tracked over the years. And I suppose it's one of those things that the library officers review over time. I think probably one of the strengths which Councillor Sciano mentioned is that because the library officers have such a close relationship with the community members and tend to know what the genres are as the people come through the door that they're interested in reading, I think they probably use that in terms of determining sort of the turnover of the cycle of the books in the different genre areas. I wouldn't say it's legislated, no.
Okay.
Are there any further speakers to that item? Councillor Tarantroy.
Yeah, just again, as an educator, libraries, I love them. Yes, we've got ebooks and they're wonderful, but kids and growing minds need tactile books, not just virtual books. It, the smell of a book, a book taking you to another place. It's a wonderful pastime, and I encourage everyone to visit their local library. Thank you.
Are there any further speakers to that item? Councillor Andrew?
Can I propose an amendment, please?
Yep.
That we remove non-fiction items published more than 10 years ago from the criteria for the discarding of items included.
I think your intention's clear, so we'll probably just move on while that's still getting on the board anyway. Is there a seconder to that amendment? Councillor Dillon? Councillor Andrew?
Thank you. I'm sorry. I think that criteria is just crazy. Non-fiction books are truthful books. They're informational books. Theoretically, that includes from 10 years ago, any books about World War I, World War II, the Iraq War, 9/11, all these things that have happened in our history, to have it as a criteria that they've been published more than 10 years ago, I think that's crazy, absolutely crazy. And because I think history is so important for our kids and our young adults to be reading and learning, and so if they were so inclined, they should read all they possibly can, if for no other reason than reading about some of the things that have happened in our past and realising the errors of our way and the lack of humanity and humility that we have shown at times, is the way I think that we become better as a society. And yeah, I just think all those books should be available. It's the only way, that we can recognise, but even recognise even some of the good achievements that we've made. This would include the landing on the moon and Titanic and all those things that we've done. So it's not just the bad things in our history like the Holocaust and wars and all those sorts of things, but also all the good things that we've accomplished. And I just think kids and young people, and then even older people that still want to read about those things, I just think that's a crazy criteria to have to remove a book from a library, is that it was published more than 10 years ago. Crazy.
Before I call on the second, can you just clarify that motion up on the board's your intention, councillor? Yep. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I concur with Councillor Andrew. Well, may I get on my soapbox about Cyclone Alby. Look, I think there are about 7 other categories and reasons why they could discard a book, whether it's a wear and tear hasn't been taken out. I think just to put an arbitrary 10 years on any non-fiction book is a bit silly, so let's look at all the other criteria before we worry about how long it's been around. Thank you, Mr. President.
Are there any other speakers to the amendment? Councillor McCleary.
I'm going to start with a question. Our libraries aren't that big, and there's new books coming in all the time. I'm just wondering where we're going to store all these things. The other thing is a physical book with history might disappear, but it'll be available in the World Wide Web of information where you can get that. There are sites where you can look up history and look at all those things and actually get some pictures and a bit of animation and from lots of variety. That's my only concern, is that how big a library do we want if we're going to hang on to every book that we ever purchase? And the other thing that discarding it doesn't necessarily mean into the bin. If you walk past the library in Dalyalup, they're out there on a bookshelf for a couple of bucks, and you can buy your Cyclone Albi book, your Titanic book. You can do all that and put it on your bookshelf, and then you can loan it to someone else. I mean, I agree. I've got stuff that my father did in university, so I've got it hanging on my shelf, probably for more other things, and they're non-fiction books. Look, I think we need to leave to the discretion of the librarians which ones need to go. There's probably a lot of other things worn beyond repair. It's probably going to be out. Do you replace it with something else? Yeah, look, history I think will still be available through other means, and I'm just a bit concerned if we keep on hanging on to things, we're just going to, well, we're going to have a huge library stacked up. There's also, I mean, something in there is how often is it being referred to as well, and probably well used, and that might be why you shouldn't throw out the one that's worn beyond repair, because that's the well used one. But yeah, look, I'm not for the amendment.
Sorry, Councillor, was there a question in there, or because you started off asking the question, or? All right. Are there any other speakers to the item? Councillor Sciano.
Not to drag the discussion of books on to all night, but I have to concur with Councillor Andrew, because at the end of the day, in relation to non-fiction items, another criteria is factually inaccurate or obsolete and superseded by newer edition. So I understand the consideration around why you may get rid of older non-fiction items, because they may become somewhat factually obsolete or inaccurate. But ultimately that is picked up through the process in here anyway. So happy to support removing that line around the 10-year mark. And also, I mean, it would blow your mind how connected state libraries are in WA, with the mothership that is the State Library of WA, and then all the local government libraries. I understand that it's there's so much information that goes around, from the library that I have in the back of work all the way to a library out in the middle of Kununurra. When items are becoming obsolete, or something has superseded, or information becomes factually incorrect, I think they have methods of communicating those things. So I think very well that the items around aged non-fiction items is pretty well covered by all the other points. So again, I guess if we are throwing out a book that's 10 years old but still relevant, we don't always have the newer edition either. I don't think they publish newer editions really that often. So yeah, happy to support the amendment. I think it's pretty well covered off the intent of that point anyway, and the rest of those criteria.
Are there any other speakers to the amendment? Councillor Noon.
Yeah, since everyone else has had a go, I might as well chip in. Yeah, some of the best woodworking books that I've got on, are 20, 25 years old, and they've got plans and all the how to do stuff. And Yeah, I agree. There's other criteria there. Not circulating in a 5-year period. If a book's sitting there and nobody actually wants to read it, then that's a better criteria for taking it out than just based on its age. Some things get better as they get older. We'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers to the amendment? Well, I'll have a crack at the whip then. Never knew books would be so topical, but I think I've got a few books that have aged like Fun One because they've got a bit spilt on them. So, got me thinking of my favourite book though, Just a Horse Ride Away. History of the Shire of Capel. That was published first time in 1995. So, geez, I'd hate that to be captured under that. Look, I don't think it's the intention that books 10 years old and get thrown out. But I'm going to support the amendment because the policy will be reviewed in 2 years anyway, and if we've got a big pile of books out the back that, oh geez, these are all old fiction books, non-fiction books that we've held on to only because we couldn't throw them away every 10 years, well then we'll change the policy then. But I think we can just grin and bear it for 2 years until the policy's reviewed again and just see how many books we have pile up that don't get discarded by any of the other mechanisms. So I'll support the amendment. Are there any other speakers to the amendment then? Well, everyone but Councillor Tantry, but that's all right. I'll hand back to Councillor Andrew as the mover. Anything further? I'll put that to the vote, the amendment. All those in favour? Those against? That's carried 6-1. That becomes the substantive motion. Should we return to? Are there any other speakers to that item? No. Councillor Dillon, do you wish to close?
Very briefly, Mr. President, I think we've gone on long enough. Who would have thought that my mention of 10-year-old non-fiction books possibly being turfed would it just whip this chamber into a frenzy? Yeah, no, I'd like to move it as amended. Thank you.
And with that, I'll put that to the vote. Those in favour? And that's carried unanimously. All right, we've been going for nearly 2 hours, so I'll adjourn the meeting for 10 minutes, just to allow a bit of a break. All right, it being 7:58, I'll call the meeting back to order. We now resume from item 15.3, the Community Sport and Recreational Facilities Fund Small Grants Round application. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor Sciano. Is there a seconder? So both ends at the same time. Is there a seconder? Councillor Dillon. The Deputy President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think this one's pretty self-explanatory. It's not often, I don't think you'll ever find me not endorsing someone's grant application to get someone else's money. So, yes, very supportive of the Capel Bowls Club and their grant application.
Councillor Dillon. Are there any speakers for or against this item? No. Does the Deputy President wish to close? I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried unanimously. Item 15.4, Dalyellup Multipurpose Community Youth Centre proposed funding. Is there a mover for that recommendation? The Deputy President. Is there a seconder? Councillor McCleary. The Deputy President.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I mean, we've seen the Dalyellup Multi-Purpose Community and Youth Centre. It's an interesting acronym, DMCYC. I don't know if that's much easier to say, but we've seen this come to council a number of times as it's progressed through its life of, applying for grants. I think in this case, the Shire is considering making a contribution in an effort to attract further grant funding to support the project. The Shire does have reserves in place that are meant to support these types of infrastructure projects through the developer contributions, so the funds obviously are there. I think there is an ultimate outcome where, if successful, the contribution may not be required, but yeah, happy to support the officer's recommendation.
Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Deputy President, for that introduction into this. Yes, look, totally agree with all that's been said. We have the reserves, and this fits the purpose for that reserve to put some money up for that. Hopefully we can attract a lot more funding for this worthy project.
Are there any speakers against the item? Councillor Andrew.
Thank you.
Question?
I have a question to begin with. That reserve, the Dalyellup Community Facilities Reserve,
Yes.
can that only be used for capital funds, or can that be, for capital costs, or can it be used for ongoing costs?
Can only be used for a capital contribution in line with the developer contribution plan.
Okay. And that's okay, I'll reserve my rights.
Sure. Are there any other speakers for or against the item? Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yeah, I think it's important that the Shire be seen to be putting in some of our own money towards such a project. Of course, we've put money in already, but of course, we're probably banking on funding for a lot of the cost of this particular project, which is a significant one. So I think it's important we put our hand into our own pocket to be showing that we're 100% behind it.
Are there any other speakers to the item? Councillor Noonan.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is really a coming of age type of facility that we're looking at for the Dalyellup community, and indeed for the whole Shire. It's just on 20 years that Dalyellup has been growing and developing, and the district centre has taken a little while to really start finding its feet, and I believe that that's really going to blossom in the next few years with some of the other developments that have happened. And so I think that this is a very important show of confidence and vote of confidence from the Shire in the Dalyellup community and the township there, so that that people can have confidence that we see it as being a very, very important part of the region.
Are there any other speakers to that item? Councillor Tarrant-Troy.
I agree with everything my fellow councillors have said. I also want to say that yes, like even when you're going for small grant funding, if you put your own money in, you're likely to get more funding from other sources as well. And putting this money from reserves into this is a good call because it'll give us the opportunity to be seen and then noticed, and then maybe other grant funding come along. This is a community that's expanding rapidly. It's the fastest growing community within the Shire of Capel, and this is a centre that's going to be used and utilised by lots and lots of families, lots of people of all ages, and I think it's going to be such a wonderful precinct area. So the more funding we can attract, the better it will be for the community. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers to that item? Councillor Andrew?
Thank you. Maybe surprisingly, maybe not, this is actually one of the items that I think about lying in bed sometimes, and the project, not just this item. I think that the design and the intention and everything behind this facility is fantastic. But when we first allocated the land for it to be a youth precinct, I'm not sure that this Shire envisaged what is now going to be probably a $10 million building plus build. When the commitment came from state government for $8 million to build this facility, we didn't ask for that. It was an election promise that kind of got dumped on us, and we thought, oh, okay, so now we're going to have this big building in Dalyalup, which is going to offer lots of wonderful services and infrastructure and everything to not just Dalyalup, but to us as a Shire as a whole and for our youth. But I can't get over the annual costs of running this facility. So our most current estimates put the maintenance and running of this facility at $800,000 a year, which is only going to increase year on year as the building ages and needs more maintenance, and staff costs go up and running costs go up. And if you put it into perspective, we work on roughly $100,000 is 1% of rates. So somewhere along the line, we are going to need an 8% rate increase just to cover the operating costs of this building in today's dollars. So when I hear my fellow councillors talk about us putting in a financial commitment, and I understand that if you put money in, then you get more money back in grants, and I understand that concept, I think as a whole, we are going to be putting in more than enough money in ongoing costs without then contributing to the capital expenses as well, which we are already doing. This is another $500,000. This isn't the only $500,000. This building is getting more and more expensive almost by the month. And it's not even getting bigger, it's getting smaller. But I wonder at what cost this is going to come at. There's a reason why the Shire of Capel doesn't have a swimming pool. It's not because of the capital costs, it's the ongoing running costs. And I think this is going to have the same problem. And I actually think before we really go much further, we have to have a really serious conversation about what it's going to cost us a year to run this and actually have a conversation with the community about whether or not they consider this a worthwhile project to be putting that kind of money into year on year on year for the next 10, 15, 20, 25 years. Because it's not our money, it's their money. And a project like this, there needs to be a hell of a lot of community buy-in, not just at the warm and fuzzy thoughts about how great it's going to be, but the actual pragmatism of it on how we're going to pay for it. Not the capital costs, the ongoing costs. Because I don't want my rates going up 8%. I don't think anyone does. And that's just for this building. That's on top of any other increase that's going to cover the continual increases in sand and gravel and asphalt. I'm not going to vote in favour of this. I'm actually not going to, I don't think, vote in favour of anything to do with the Dale multipurpose community centre until we've actually had those conversations with the community. Because I, in good conscience, can't continue to vote for something that is going to cost our ratepayers almost $1 million a year to run. I can't.
Are there any other speakers to that item? I think that's actually everyone, apart from myself. Look, I'll say a few words, and I want to... Obviously, I support the officer's recommendation and appreciate the comments that have been made around the table tonight. And look, I think that the concerns raised by Councillor Andrew are definitely valid. They're very valid. It certainly is an ambitious building in terms of what it's trying to achieve, in terms of some of the standards it's trying to meet, and then ultimately what it's actually wanting to do for the Dale Yallup Centre. There are a few comments, though, that were made that I don't agree with, and I'd like to sort of raise some of them while also talking to the building. The multipurpose centre has been identified in the Shire's long-term financial plan for probably near on a decade. It's something that has been planned for the Dale Yallup district for some time. But it has been continually pushed out in that plan due to the fact that at the time, and through multiple reviews of that long-term financial plan, it would have required council to pay for the full construction of that building, which even I remember in 2017 when I did my first review of the long-term financial plan, at that time was already estimated at about an $8 million building. So it has moved along. Anyway, this funding has come from the state government, which at the time seemed to be about in line with what the Shire's long-term financial plan is. But alas, we've had the cost increases and escalations due to COVID and the labour shortages that are around and those sorts of things, and the price of steel and cost increases that go across multiple sectors. So it took a building from that was probably hanging around those $9 million to about $11.5 million. Having been involved quite a bit in the planning phase and through the community consultation, the building has been value engineered. So some of the floor space has been reduced. Certain parts of the building have been changed a little bit to remove a wall to make it a bit more operable. And that has delivered us with this building, which now, yes, sits at a bit over $11 million for the total capital construction component. We've also looked at other ways of either staging it and those sorts of things, but in terms of how the building's actually laid out, to try and meet some of the other standards the Shire had, to try and keep some of the operating costs lower, in terms of trying to make the building 4-star eco standard, to reduce our operating costs in the building. It meant some of those options just weren't available to us in the staging mechanism. So the building hasn't been scope creep. It hasn't been, trying to gold plate or anything like that. It's been a building that has just grown over time in its cost only because of the situation we find ourselves in the economic climate. And as we've seen from some of the data coming forward, we're going to see those costs continue till probably the end of the decade. Towards the operational, the operating expenses, that's the figure that we've been given of about $800,000 to run it is quite a high level study at this point in time. And some of those things are based on assumptions such as, it's just, 10%. So overall asset maintenance, that's just a number that's 1% of the total capital construction cost. So that overall asset maintenance per year won't always be 1%. But we're not increasing, we're not just going to whack in a budget of $800,000 to run this building. We're actually already spending about $355,000 per year running our current library and other services in Dalyella. These will be moved across into this building. So we'll no longer be paying a lease, and some staffing in requirements will increase in this new building, but that's because there's a different offering there. Mostly the digital hub, which is tied to some of the state government grant funding, but was also something that was keenly expressed not only through the residents in Dalyella, but we also had input from schools and tertiary institutions around the area, not only in Dalyella, but some in the broader region, who either have the technology but don't have the capability, or have the capability but don't have the technology. So it was a proposal that this building would incorporate that facility and provide a central hub for these schools to access and teach students those next stage skills in robotics, in programming, those sorts of future economy skills that there is a bit of a gap in the market. So there's certainly an increase, yes, in how much this building would cost to operate compared to what we're already offering in Dalyella. However, it wouldn't be necessarily an 8% increase in year one to do it. Half of the operating expenditure already exists, and that's just based on a lot of assumptions. The estimated $800,000 annual running fee it's just a lot of assumptions that'll be dwindled down, but also when we realise the full value of savings that'll come through having a building design to meet some energy saving criteria. So look, it is a big project, and I really do understand and appreciate the concerns raised by Councillor Andrew, but this building has gone through the community consultation. It's been planned for a long time. It's not expensive because of scope creep or over specifying the building. It's been value engineered. It's only gone up because of the economy we find ourselves in. So I still think in supporting this project that council can absolutely have that conversation about exactly what degree of service they see offered out of that building. Do they want more staff? Do they want satellite services from satellite Shire services? So not just your library staff there. It's proposed that this building could have customer service staff to help things with rate payments and dog registration, etc., operate out of this building. If that's something that Dalyella doesn't need, and that's something we can offer online, then there's potentially a cost saving there as well. So that's all things to look at in the future, and through consultation with the community in the future about what exactly do you want to see in this building. But more importantly, there's also the youth element of this building. Dalyella houses 35% of the Shire's youth population. It's the largest concentration in the district. This building is going to be a central location for all their services to be run out of, and we've already had some interest expressed from youth organisations and Headspace about potentially moving into that and being a tenant as part of the building, increasing those services that we're offering, and we'll see how that will just benefit the precinct that we're already seeing delivered with the skate park and the pump track and the nature play space that are already at the end of Portobello Road there. This building will just tie that all together. But in terms of the capital contribution, the $500,000 contribution from council, look, that's money that we do have in reserve. that has been collected through developer contributions specifically for this reason, this centre, as well as a few other projects. Some of those projects, like the Millennium site and the Green Patch, are certainly got a big question mark over them, whether council proceeds them or not. We also do have to look at the future district sporting space plan. However, that's currently not included as part of the developer contribution plan, so we can't use the funds for that at the moment anyway. But in moving forward with this contribution, it doesn't necessarily mean that council will spend this money, but it does show that we're serious about this building. It'll hopefully bring in a bit more funding. We still have a application in with the federal government, which we're yet to hear back from. If that funding comes in, it will mean that council's capital contribution will not be required. So we do have options still before us in terms of the capital cost, but also the operating cost. But we'll go through all that in the future, especially when this comes to tender, and when we have the consultation with the community about what do you actually want to see run out of this facility. So, look, I commend the recommendation to the council. I think Dalyellup has had to wait a long time for some of these facilities. You know, it's only 2 years ago that it got a skate park. It's only a couple of weeks ago it got a pump track, whereas a lot of the other parts of our district already have those facilities. So we're already seeing the current hall in Dalyellup reaching capacity, which is a good thing, but this will just be another space that the community can have to meet as we continue to build the community in Dalyellup. All right. So, there being no other speakers available to speak, I'll return the call to the Deputy President.
Thank you, Mr. President. I think you've summed up a lot of what I wanted to talk about in my right of reply. And I think the concerns that Councillor Andrew has expressed are very legitimate and are definitely something that is always needing to be considered. And some councillors at the table may not remember, or most councillors weren't at this table when this happened, but there was actually meant to be a youth precinct and youth centre and new community centre in the civic precinct behind us. And you'll actually, if you go out there and you look at the southern side of the precinct, you'll see where the lawn stops and the dirt starts, or where the lawn stops and the old pump track is. That got to the very, very last stage. We were here about to award a tender, and council decided not to proceed on operating costs. Now, I admit, very shattered. It was a beautiful building. It was going to be a staple, a centrepiece of that entire civic precinct. There was a lot of government money that we were worried about not getting back, and that's ultimately how we ended up with the car park, which was stage 3B. And I mean, that car park is in very high demand. So look, these things are always a consideration when we're talking about projects, particularly ones that take away or have staff resources included, because staff at the end of the day is often one of the highest expenses in the operating costs of facilities like this. The President has touched on it. There is the estimate of about a $780,000 operating cost, but the true figure, the true increase in operating costs with this building coming online with those is almost half of that at $425,000. So current operating expenditure of the libraries and the services that we already deliver in Dalyellup is $355,000. So the argument that this is an $800,000 impost on the budget is not the case. And as the President sort of outlined, this has been in the long-term financial plan and the developer contribution plan for a long time. As much as we like to swing it around from time to time, these election commitments don't actually come out of thin air. They come from conversations between candidates and local members that come to councils during election period when the checkbooks are ready and open, and they look at those long-term financial plans because that's where the council's vision's going. So if anything, we are, and I have to share my thanks with the local member, Don Punch, and the state government and Lottery West for the support that they've thrown behind a project like this to start off with $8 million and to continue topping that up with Lottery West funding, and the work of the staff to go out and seek additional funding from federal government and other agencies as well to get us where the point we are. And as the President said, ultimately in our long-term financial plan, we would have been funding this through developer contributions and reserves and our own cash. So the financial position that we find ourselves in delivering a project that we've envisioned for the community, it will always be far greater than if we'd gone about this alone and followed the long-term financial plan the way it is. We also definitely wouldn't have been delivering it at such a time. And I get the argument as well that it's easy to talk about the warm and fuzzy, particularly when we're talking about youth centres, and I am guilty of that on most occasions. But as the President said, there is a level of service delivery that currently doesn't exist in Dale-up. There is a level of staffing and support and facilities and services that doesn't currently exist in Dale-up. And this building, though the youth precinct is such an important part of it, is also about making the Shire present within that community of Dale-up. Being a centrepiece and providing a show of confidence in the community in the centre of Dale-up. And I think the vision has always been, I know it's something that's been mentioned a lot, about having Shire services available through that building. The idea that if you want to pay in cash to pay your rates, you have to travel to Capel. And look, that makes sense. This is where, at the end of the day, it's the Shire of Capel. This is where our administrative building is. But Dale-up is no doubt such a growing community, has growing needs, has a growing population of young people, and the services that can be delivered through there, like the President's mentioned with the facilities and the other organisations that are keen and interested to get into that. I mean, that's not warm and fuzzy. That's what we're looking for. Well, it is warm and fuzzy, but that's exactly the sort of services and things we need to provide to the community, and that's how the community buy-in really comes along. So, look, I will have this conversation every time this comes back, and we have to keep looking at these figures, and we have to keep making sure we're on top of this and understanding what the expenses are going to be like in the future. But by all means, I think in conclusion, this is not an $800,000 impost, and it is not planned to be an $800,000 impost on the budget. This project is needed by the municipality, and we are going out there today to seek further funding to ensure that the capital works can be done, and they can be done within budget.
And with that, I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? And that's carried 6-1. All right, item 15.5, request for tender 2307, disposal of asset, lot 39, Ilmenite Crescent, Capel. Is there a mover for that recommendation? Councillor McCleary. Is there a seconder? Councillor Dillon. Councillor McCleary.
Thank you, Mr. President. One comment I'll make, it's about time. It's been on the market for a while. I think this is a good outcome. We move something that we haven't been able to dispose of for a number of years, and it looks like a good value in things. The other upshot is that it brings another organisation into the town of Capel, which will hopefully create some new employment opportunities.
Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Mr. President. One down, one to go.
Are there any speakers against that item? Councillor Andrew.
The valuations were done on the 13th of February 2023. By my calculations, that's more than 6 months.
The recommendation 2 outlines that.
Yes.
Yep. Does that answer your question, Councillor? Yep. Are there any other speakers to that item? Councillor McCleary. No. I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried. Unanimous. 15.6 Financial Reports, 30th of June 2023. Is there a mover for those reports? Councillor Sciano. Is there a seconder? Councillor Terrantroy. The Deputy President.
Move as read.
Councillor Terrantroy. Are there any speakers for or against those financial statements? No. Does the mover wish to close? I'll put those to the vote. Those in favour? That's carried. Unanimous. 15.7 The accounts paid during the month of July 2023. Is there a mover for those accounts? Councillor Dillon. Is there a seconder? Councillor Terrantroy. Councillor Dillon.
Just as presented, Mr. President, although I would encourage our fine youth of Capel town itself to use our new trampoline.
Councillor Terrantroy.
Look, I had several questions before the meeting about this, and all of my questions were answered to my satisfaction by staff. So I have no problem with putting this for acceptance.
Are there any speakers for or against the item? No. Councillor Dillon, do you wish to close? I'll put that item to the vote. Those in favour? Those against? That's carried 6-1. There's no new business of an urgent nature. Excuse me. So now move to public question time. Is there any public questions? You can ask a question from the floor. Yeah. Sorry, can you just come to the... Yeah.
At one point, you were talking about that we needed to, council, we needed to talk about the Millennium site when you were talking about the facilities for Daliela.
Yep.
Do you mind explaining?
Sure. So the Shire has its long-term financial plan, which we project out projects in the future. As part of that was identified the Millennium Sports Field, which was included as the master plan for that part of the Dalyellop estate.
Mm-hmm.
Given some of the issues around there being contamination and an apparent lack of appetite to proceed with that, there just needs to be a decision about how that continues as part of remaining on the Shire's long-term financial plan, or whether the project is removed.
Sorry, the project of having sport fields on top of the site? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, there was originally a structure plan that sporting fields would be placed on top of the Millennium dumping site.
Yep.
Up the back of the green patch.
But now it's not happening, no?
It's still included in the Shire's long-term financial plan, so as part of us reviewing that plan, discussions would need to be had as whether that remains, given light of the report and the conditions around that site. So,
okay.
And it still sits within our developer. It's still,
It's just because it's there, it needs to be talked about, no? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Because there's
so
no...
it's there, and council has a position that was opposed to the green patch development because of some of those issues around contamination.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that includes the future sporting precinct that was located there.
Right.
So council needs to now formally recognise whether it wants to proceed or not.
Right.
It can continue with just keeping it in the plan and budgeting for something that it may or may not build, or it can decide to no longer plan for that project and also have it removed from the developer contribution plan.
And then find something somewhere else? Or
Yes. So the Shire has identified a requirement for sporting facilities, particularly in the Dalyellop area.
Yep.
And it's in those. It's in that process right now, of reviewing sites.
Right.
And moving forward with that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Are there any further public questions? No. Motions without notice. Is there any motions? Nope. Are there any notices of motions for consideration at the next ordinary meeting of the council? No. Item for consideration behind closed doors. There was one item, but it has been withdrawn. There being no further business on the agenda this evening, I'll declare the meeting closed at 8:34. Thank you very much for your attendance this evening.